Elohechem, Asher Hotzeiti Echem, Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. In just a moment, we will continue on page 158 by singing Mi Chamocha, the song of the sea that the Israelites sang as they crossed the Red Sea from slavery into freedom, and we'll sing it to the melody with which we began our service, the special melody for Sukkot. It's actually traditional for us to sing Mi Chamocha to the melody of whatever time it is in the Jewish calendar. And I'll embarrass my mother and father-in-law for just a moment, cantors Jack and Fred of Mendelssohn, who are in the congregation this evening, and I asked my father-in-law, Jack, once, why is it that we sing Mi Chamocha to the melodies of whatever time of year it is in the Jewish calendar? And he said, I'm not sure where that tradition came from. He sent an email around to his cantorial listserv, and a good scholar friend of his pointed out that the Song of the Sea is probably the first communal song that we have in the Jewish tradition. And as one of the first communal songs, it then became one of the first congregational melodies, one of the first opportunities within a prayer service for the congregation to join in. So it became a perfect opportunity for the congregation to attune itself to where we are in the Jewish calendar by having everybody sing along to the melody of the season. And so we'll continue now on page 158, Mi Chamocha.
Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael.
Amen. Page 160.
Baruch atah Adonai, Haporei Sukkot Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim Vekonei Hakol Vezocher Chasdei Avot Ve'imot Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah Ata Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayeh HaKol Ata Rav Lehoshia Morid Hatal Mechakel Chaim Bechesed Mechayeh HaKol Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamocha Bal Gevurot Ubido Melach Melech Mebit Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman ata lahachayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh hakol Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh U'kedoshim b'chol yom yehalelucha selah Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el hakadosh.
We invite you now to take a few moments for private reflection. You might look for words of inspiration within our prayer book or find the words in your own heart. You can spend this time either standing or sitting. there's perhaps no more recognizable symbol of Sukkot, maybe other than the sukkah itself, than the symbol of the Lulav and the etrog, which we're going to in a moment have the opportunity to bless and shake. And as we prepare to do so, I'm reminded of a moment earlier this week that I had. I was revisiting a favorite short story of mine by the Hebrew poet laureate, or I guess he's a writer laureate, I can't think of his right title, by the Hebrew novelist Shai Agnon. I think he has a Nobel Prize for Literature. Shai Agnon has a story called The Etrog, which is about a certain pious Jew living in Jerusalem in the days just before the establishment of the State of Israel. And this Jew goes out into the marketplace in Jerusalem trying to find the most beautiful etrog that he can find. We're told on Sukkot that it's a mitzvah to find the most glorious, beautiful, ripe, lush, good-smelling etrog in the principle of hidor mitzvah, the principle of making a mitzvah particularly beautiful, particularly becoming and pleasing aesthetically. So this Jew goes out trying to find the most beautiful etrog that he can, and he goes into the marketplace and he finds himself confronting a dilemma where he has to choose between, on the one hand, hidor mitzvah, this idea that we should elevate our lulav and etrog aesthetically, and on the other hand, the principle of tzedakah, that he needs to make sure he's not spending so much on his lulav and etrog that he's meanwhile missing the needs of his fellow human beings who are around him. And you can find the story in translation on the internet if you're looking for it. It's called Etrog by Shai Agnon, and I promise it's more compelling than my summary of it is here. You should check it out. But one line from the story that particularly stood out to me this week that I'm reminded of is as this certain pious Jew is thinking through his dilemma, he says to a certain shopkeeper, yes, it's true, the etrog needs to be kosher, but isn't it true that the money should be kosher as well? Which to me reminds me that when we shake the lulav and the etrog in the 6 directions all around us, we're reminding ourselves not only that God is all around of us, but also too that our responsibilities are all around us. That we're not just obligated to create beautiful ways to observe our Jewish tradition through rituals, but also to find our responsibilities to human beings and to our whole world in every corner. Not only a kosher etrog, but the money should be kosher as well. Would the congregation please rise as we prepare to turn to page 558 to offer the blessing for lulav and etrog. We'll say, the blessing is not there on 558, I apologize. I will offer the blessing and then we'll sing some words together that on page 558. We'll say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav vitzivanu al netilat lulav. Praised are you, our eternal God, who makes our lives holy with sacred responsibilities and commands us to take up the lulav and the etrog. Page 558. Ki leolam chasto.
Yomar na Yisrael.
Ki leolam chasto.
Yomeru na Beit Aaron.
Ki leolam chasto.
Yomeru na Yirei Adonai.
Ki leolam chasto. Ki leolam chasto.
Yomar na Yisrael.
Ki leolam chasto.
Yomeru na Beit Aaron.
Ki leolam chasto.
Yomeru na Yirei Adonai.
Ki leolam chasto. We may be seated. As you were coming in, check 1, 2. Okay, as you were coming in, you may have had the opportunity to grab a handout on your way in the door. If you didn't get a chance to grab one, I invite you to find one for yourself now. Maybe if someone doesn't have one, you could raise a hand. Tracy, our greeter, could help one to make its way to you. On these first few Shabbatot after the High Holy Days, we often take an opportunity to do something of a look back at the messages that you heard from the Bima during the High Holy Days, something of a sermon review. So we will in a second take a look at a text that wound up on the cutting room floor of the sermon that I delivered on Yom Kippur. If you weren't with us, or if you were with us and it's not the freshest in your memory, I preached on Yom Kippur about two competing views of sin. One view that's linked with classical Christianity, but really with Western civilization at large, where sin is traceable to Adam and Eve. And the competing view, the Jewish notion, that sin doesn't come from Adam and Eve, that we don't have original sin passed down through the generations, but rather in our concept, sin being traced back to Cain. And there's some important distinctions that are made between those two views, which we're not going to go into tonight. But I do want to look at a text that I was really taken by, but not able to include in the sermon, about Cain, from a book by Alan Middleman. Alan Middleman is a professor of Jewish philosophy at JTS on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and he has a great book called Human Nature and Jewish Thought. Really, really an excellent book. He takes the most cutting-edge research on neurobiology, on contemporary philosophy about human nature, and puts it into conversation with classical Jewish texts on human nature. He's arguing against a position that he labels as scientism. Scientism, a term that he uses, and he tries not to use it pejoratively, meaning, I mean that sincerely. He tries not to use it pejoratively. Scientism, this idea that is very much at the forefront of some of those fields, neurobiology, philosophy these days, that says that we human beings are not as much in control as we think we are, that our neurons often fire before we're even conscious of them, that we are in many ways, like on the biological, the chemical, and the physical level, no different from everything else in the universe, and that human beings actually aren't that unique in the world. He's arguing against that position from the perspective of Jewish texts. He doesn't discard it outright. He really deeply engages with it in a way that's quite accessible, and I recommend the book highly. We're going to look at just one piece from his book. This is a passage on Cain and Abel from Alan Middleman's Human Nature and Jewish Thought. If it were not the public health conditions that we're currently in, I'd come around, I'd give someone the microphone, give you the chance to read. I hope that you'll permit me to read on all of our behalfs and to make some comments as we go along the way. So this is Alan Middleman. He's quoting the medieval philosopher Joseph Albo. You have his dates there. He lived in Spain just before the expulsion from Spain, by the way, when you notice those dates. The medieval philosopher Joseph Albo develops the theme of the relationship between humans and animals in a philosophical sermon on Cain's sin and subsequent fate. Okay, let's unpack for just one sec. Remember I said this thing about scientism, which says that human beings on the chemical, the biological, and the physical level are just like humans? Humans and animals are just the same? He's going to try and argue against that. So here's Albo's sermon on humans and animals around Cain's story. Albo's reading also tries to account for God's mysterious favoring of Abel's offering and God's spurning of Cain's sacrifice. If you take a really careful look at the Torah narrative, although we can make some inferences about why God might have preferred Abel's over Cain's sacrifice, if you look very carefully at the text, no reason is explicitly given, and our inferences are only that, guesses. So Albo's going to try to do two things, to make a distinction between humans and animals, and also to help us understand the mystery of why God accepted Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's. Albo presents Cain and Abel as representing two different views concerning the animal-human relationship. Adam, father of Adam and Cain, or Abel and Cain rather, was not permitted to eat meat despite its health benefits, since the practice of killing animals accustoms people to, now quoting Albo's sermon, cruelty, rage, and the bad habit of shedding innocent blood. If you look back in the early chapters of Genesis, you'll remember that in the beginning of creation with Adam and Eve, they're permitted only to eat vegetables. It's not until Noah comes along after the flood that finally human beings are permitted to eat meat. The original humans are vegetarians. And so Adam, not allowed to eat animals. Instead, God assigns to Adam the seed-bearing plants as food, while assigning to the animals plants like grass, whose seeds are not apparent. Okay, so human beings can eat fruits. We can eat from the trees, whereas like dogs and cats, cows and horses can only eat grassy things. The purpose of this distinction between human diet and animal diet was, according to Albo, to show the superiority of the human species to other animals, to make us distinct from one another, just like the argument that Middleman is making, that humans and animals, there's something superior, something, what that thing is, we have to discover between humans and animals. From observing their father, that is Cain and Abel observing their father, as he cultivates and eats the plants, the two brothers draw differing conclusions. Cain sees that all things eat plants. Humans, animals are all eating plants, and Cain does not think that humans are radically superior to animals. Okay, I'm eating, apples, they're eating grass. What's the difference? It's all vegetables. We're all vegetarians. Humans, animals, equal. Abel, on the other hand, believes that humans have greater relative, but not absolute, superiority because we do eat plants just like the animals do, but humans, unlike the animals, grow plants. So Abel sees humans as being like slightly different, but not like totally different, not absolutely, not radically superior, because we, after all, eat plants like them. The only thing that makes us really different is that we can grow them. So, like Cain, therefore, Abel doesn't really see humans as sufficiently different than animals. Okay, he's all just setting up the problem here. I know I'm going extremely slowly, but there's lots to pick out and think through together. In Albo's reading, God meets Cain halfway. In God's consoling address, God says to Cain, or asks of Cain, "Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen?" This is after God has rejected Cain and accepted Abel. God says to Cain, "Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen?" And God asserts, "Surely, if you do right, there is uplift." The meaning of this, Albo claims, is, you're right. A man is born a wild ass and has no superiority over the animal in actuality when he comes into the world. But he has superiority potentially if he practices goodness and realizes his potentialities and recognizes the greatness of the eternal. If a human does well, he will be lifted up above the animals, picking up on this line, "Surely if you do right, there is uplift." That's what God says to Cain. If you do right, there is uplift, which Albo interprets to mean, yeah, you're equal to the animals, but if you do something right, if you are a moral person, then you actually rise above the animals. Okay, back to the second side of the sheet. But Cain instead selectively listened to God's counsel. Cain heard that there is no inherent superiority of humans over animals, and he thus thought that there was no fundamental difference between his brother and the animals. Remember the whole thing that started this problem. We're trying to determine, are humans and animals fundamentally similar or fundamentally different? Cain believes that humans and animals are fundamentally still the same. And since it was clear that God favored Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's, and let's pause for a second and remember what each of them sacrificed. Abel sacrificed animals of his flock, whereas Cain sacrificed some vegetables. Seeing that God appreciated the animal sacrifices of his brother, and Cain thinking that animals and humans are exactly the same, Cain inferred that killing animals is permissible, and hence killing Abel was permissible, because animals and humans, in his view, are on the exact same level. Although a wicked passion, namely envy, enters into Cain's decision, what cinches the chain of faulty reasoning, what cinches the chain is faulty reasoning. Cain hasn't properly thought through the problem of whether animals and humans are similar or different. And having had faulty reasoning, that's what leads him to sin, to go out and kill his brother. When God comes to punish him then, Cain does not yet understand that to shed the blood of a human being is a more serious matter than to shed the blood of an animal. Okay.
So Albo's reasoning is not entirely clean, says Middleman, bound as it is to a sermonic form and entangled in the interpretation of biblical verses, but his basic claims are apparent enough. And his point is, according to Middleman, that there is a radical dichotomy in worth between humans and animals. And to shade that dichotomy is to court conceptual and moral confusion. Cain thought that animals and humans are equal. Abel thought that humans only slightly better than animals. Anything but a perfect distinction between them is to court conceptual and moral confusion. Cain, after all, thought it was okay to kill animals and then therefore would be okay to kill his brother, leading to a moral fault. Nevertheless, it's not an animal aspect of our human nature that causes us to sin or to stray. Rather, it's something else. It's a failure of our uniquely human capacity to reason, to appreciate the dignity of the human. What distinguishes us, or rather what causes us to sin, is not because we have some animal-like instincts. What causes us to sin is when we don't use our rationality fully, when we don't think problems through, when we don't let our reason overcome our passions. Albo rounds out his sermon by adducing the figure of Seth, who is the third brother in this trio. Adam and Eve have a third son after Abel is killed, and Seth will fill out the rest of the story for us. Adam's late-born son, who, unlike Cain and Abel, but like his father, is explicitly begotten, quote, in his image after his likeness. When Cain and Abel are born, that phrase is not used. When Seth is born, that phrase is used, somehow indicating that the Torah's narrator wants us to know that Seth is in his father's image in his mother's image, in a way that Abel and Cain never were. A fact which Albo takes to mean that Seth recognizes the dignity of the human form that is in the image of God, unlike the two brothers who got it confused most terribly in Cain's case. The image, that is, inheres most fully in those who are self-aware enough to know that they possess it and who act accordingly. So, what are we to make of this late medieval Spanish-Jewish sermon on human nature and on Cain and Abel? I think what we're supposed to take away from this is that we are different from animals. And although sometimes that leads human beings to do things that are really not good for the rest of the world, we think that because we're special, that we can act as we want to and cut down rainforests and put our food supply chain in ways that really cause a lot of harm to animals. Although sometimes thinking that we're better than animals gives us bad instincts on how we should act on this earth, we also need to remember that we are somehow slightly more than the animals. Because when we don't, then we treat one another like animals. We need to both be better at how we treat animals, but more importantly for Albo at least, we need to learn to treat one another with human dignity. That can be a really hard thing to do, even though it seems so easy. I hope that we can all strive for it in this coming Jewish New Year. Shabbat Shalom. We'll turn our hearts now to people who we're praying for healing. And if there's anyone that you're thinking of this Shabbat who would feel good to know that you were thinking of them here, I invite you to rise in your place and share their name with us. To these names we add Rachel Bat Chava, Yitzchak Halevi ben Sholem, Elizabeth Hars, Abraham ben Miriam, Sue Malinverney, Shana Bracha, Barbara Feldman, Eliyahu Mecha ben Sarah, Robert Zagoria, Tony DeLappa, Gina DeLappa, Naomi Bat Moshe Esther, Mark Sosnowitz, Matthew Atwood, Stephen Bleckman, Andrew, Gloria Byron, Anthony and Elizabeth Danker, Mordechai Ben Yaakov, Deborah Kapnick, Nicole Shusi, Neil Glaskell, Leah Greenspan, Andrea Reiner, Masha Batsora, Aviva Tzila Bat Esther Bela, Jeffrey Millman, Ken Master, Libby Corona, Chava bat Sarah, Eliyahu Chaim ben Fradel, Sheila Fried, Malka Tzipora bas Rachel, Tamar bat Malka, Heschel Meir ben Davida Chana, Howard Cowan, Rosa Aurora Ramirez Vera, and other names that we carry with us in our hearts. Our prayer for healing can be found on page 371.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor Habracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor Habracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Our concluding prayers begin on page 586. Would the congregation please rise?
Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latei kedula leotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishbechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, umishachavim umodim, Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai
Lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. On the holiday of Sukkot, we read from the book of Ecclesiastes these words, made more familiar, of course, by the birds, that there is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to reap, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to laugh and a time to cry, a time to build up and a time to break down, a time to gather stones and a time to cast away stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And of course, there also is a time for remembering those who have lived and who have died, which is what we do now. I would ask the congregation, if there are mourners among us, to please rise in the following order. If you have laid a loved one to rest within the past 7 days, would you please rise? If you have laid a loved one to rest within the past 30 days, would you please rise? If you are within the first year of mourning your loved one, would you now rise? And if this Shabbat marks the yahrzeit, the anniversary of your loved one's death, would you please rise? I'd ask us all to rise together as one community in support of the mourners among us as we remember our loved ones. We remember first those most recently taken from us: Stephen Schmerler, son of Hannah Schmerler, brother of David Schmerler and fiance of Anne Mercier; Andrea Pinto, daughter of Ronnie and Dawn Lee and sister of Brandon Lee; Lee Meyer, grandmother of Jennifer Newman; Georgette Nussbaum, wife of Lucian Nussbaum and mother of Mitchell Nussbaum; Marion Miller, grandmother of Jody Cascade; Richard Razumna, father of Daniel Razumna and Paul Razumna; Lucille Menon, wife of Dick Menon and mother of Donna Sherry and Jeffrey Menon; Nelson Salzman, husband of Renee Salzman and father of Joan Grant and Lori Morton. Patricia Lazarus, wife of Mel Lazarus. And on their yahrzeit, we remember Marcia Aberle, Herbert Adler, Joseph Alderman, Roy Alper, Judith Barr, Charles Bernstein, Roberta Black, William Bookvar, Samuel Cascade, Fabian M. Crystal, Abraham Dolans, Sidney Dreyfuss, Dorothy Duckstein, Seymour Estrin, Jean Fehrenbaker, Richard Feynman, Sina Fish, Marjorie Fogel, Jeanette Fox, Charles Gilbert, William Gipps, Florence Hoffman, Louis Kane, Marvin Kessler, Joel Krupman, Lawrence S. Lees, Carl Leff, Alan Mall, Sheldon Myman, Abraham Menon, Edith Mintz, Lev Mazukovsky, David Petrikoff, Nelda Munguia, Murray Nowak, Sidney Pepperbloom, Moses Polak, Martha Prince, Sylvia Ray, Aaron Risen, Gilbert Rich, Florence Rice, Mickey Rothstein, Barbara Rubin, Ralph Schwartz, Morris Schwitzman, Sandy Siegel, James Steinberg, Fanny V. Toff, Adele Wang, James Weisbart, Leonard Weitz, Morris Weston, Herman Wiesenthal, Richard Wiesenthal, Helen Wilner, Phyllis Wishnick, Milton Witchell, Gail Zick, and other names that we carry with us in our hearts. If there are names to add to our commemoration that I have not yet said or that I've inadvertently mispronounced, I invite you to say them now. The words of the Mourner's Kaddish can be found on page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, Bialma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'yizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam u'lomei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal, Shmei d'kudsha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
We may be seated. A few brief announcements before we conclude. Our observance of Shabbat, of course, does not end tonight, but continues into tomorrow, first with Torah study at 9 a.m., and also our Sharing Shabbat Minyan for families, live and in person here in the CJL tent, Torah study taking place via Zoom. And then in the afternoon, we'll celebrate the bar mitzvah of Ryan Cami at 5 p.m. There's a lot upcoming at WRT in the next 2 weeks or so. I'm going to share just things that are in the next week because it's really quite a lot. So please check our calendar and our e-blast to know everything that's going on and find out how you can get involved in something that catches your interest. This Sunday, a special Sukkot musical family program at 4:15 in the CJL tent. Please come and join us for storyteller and singer Bill Gord for a special Sukkot special Sukkot program aimed at families with young children. On Monday evening and Tuesday morning, we'll celebrate the holiday of Simchat Torah. Monday evening online in a national URJ Simchat Torah program. We hope that you'll join us and Reform Jews all around the country for that special occasion. And then Tuesday morning here at WRT for our Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret celebration in the CJL. On Saturday of next weekend, the WRJ looks forward to celebrating Havdalah with Cantor Kleinman. And then the following day, Sunday, October 3rd, the Men's Club invites you to meet Nadav Shachmon to hear about the effects of COVID on Israeli society, along with Rabbi Blake, and then also so much more coming in just the week right after that. Please join us for some of those events. We want to say thank you to Tracy Cohn, our greeter this evening. Thank you for welcoming us as we came in the door, and Mazel Tov to the Cami family on their bar mitzvah tomorrow. We'll conclude with singing. Would the congregation please rise?
La la la
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
But it's true. Because you know why? Because I feel free when I play with her. I do. I feel like if I give it my all, it's going to be uncovered. You know, because you don't like when people that you work with kind of make you kind of on your back foot. Like you're worried, like, oh, is this going to be with her? I just feel like if I can just trust the spirit, it's going to be all right. That's why she's so great. Yep, she's Amanda. Period. Well, it was a real pleasure to have you.